Well, good morning, everyone. It is a true honor and pleasure to be here with all of you and to be here with two distinguished men who are at the front lines of addressing the opioid crisis. I'm particularly excited to have this conversation because when you hear about the opioid epidemic, it's easy to feel despondent about the numbers going the wrong way, the number of overdoses continuing to increase, and about the extraordinary pain and anguish this is causing communities all across America. But when I was a Surgeon General, I was very intent on finding those bright spots and sources of hope because I believed that we needed them. We needed to hear those stories in order to find the drive and the desire to keep going. And the two gentlemen here are those bright spots. They are sources of hope because of what they are doing in West Virginia. Now, I first came across their work participating on the selection committee of the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, which awards $1 million grants to a select few cities which are working on transformative initiatives. And I'll tell you that the day we discussed their proposal, we were all so impressed by what they had done, and because they had really focused in on an insidious but important problem that was affecting first responders. So I'd love to get started with both you, Mayor, and you, Sergeant, with asking you just first of all how you came up with the idea for this project. I'm hoping you can tell people what it is and why it's become so important.
As many of the public officials will attest, I hate social media. But I do have folks on our staff that follow it very, very closely. And one of the things that we continued to see on social media as the overdoses were increasing, we had individuals who were posting on social media, let them die. That broke my heart because I also knew and know the heart of the people of the city. I know they don't mean that. So that was telling us that there's compassion fatigue within the community. And if that's happening in the community, it's naturally going to be reflected by our first responders because they are part of the community. So in order to address the community's concerns, we also had to address our first responders' concerns. Thus, the compassion fatigue program that we've developed.
I think it's so amazing that you picked up on that because I think that that's not unique to Huntington. I think that compassion fatigue is affecting people everywhere. And Sergeant, I'm hoping, as somebody who's right there in the middle, of first responders and helping to lead them on the front lines of this crisis, tell us a little bit about what this compassion fatigue looked like. How is it manifesting?
Well, compassion fatigue was responding to the same type of traumatic call repeatedly. Officers would respond especially to overdoses, and when you responded to these overdoses, you're accustomed to solving problems. And when we were initially going to these calls, we wanted to help people. But when we went to these calls, they were very negative interactions. So that caused us problems. So we began to have problems with it. And we realized that we became negative responding to these calls.
Well, what you start seeing is there might have, in several years, 5 or 6 death experiences. They were having that many a month.
We were initially, 5 to 6 years ago, there were 4 to 5 deaths a year. With the overdose epidemic, we began to respond to 40 to 50 death scenes a year.
Yeah, that's an extraordinary increase.
And what they're also seeing is we're in a small town. We're just shy of 50,000 people. These police officers, firefighters, and EMS workers were responding to people who they had gone to school with. We have one firefighter who had five people who he went to high school with who he saw die. Now you can imagine how that starts to eat its soul. These are men and women who step into their profession because they're going there to solve a problem, to make sure that order is placed. And throughout this opioid epidemic, it's anything but. The problem isn't being solved, and we've got to find a way, and we are finding a way. This isn't all negative. But they needed to know that we were standing by their side and not just focused on those who we all want to heal, but these guys and women also needed to be healed as well.
I mean, when hearing you talk, the word that pops to my mind is trauma. This experience of responding to so many overdoses and seeing people you know and grew up with die from opioid overdoses, it's emotionally traumatic. And I think many of us don't often in our own lives have tools for dealing with that trauma. I'm curious to learn a little bit about the program and for you to share that with everybody. Tell us how that program sought to address this emotional trauma that first responders were experiencing.
One of the things that when we first started, I was a bit shocked because as we were reaching out to the police officers and firefighters and other first responders, I thought they're going to embrace this, that we're talking about the science of addiction and what they're encountering, and we got stiff-armed big time. Stiff-armed. Simply because we started to realize we weren't addressing their problems. The lesson that we learned here is that as we learn to deal with our first responders, we also learn how to deal with the community, because as the community is responding negatively, they want to hear that I'm going to sound like Bill Clinton here, we feel your pain. Our first responders needed us to listen to them at first. And then as they started talking, then you can hear some of the things here. There's some things that they were doing that I was going, there is no way in Hades that that's going to work with these guys.
We were very reluctant initially because we were being told about how to do so many different things, and we were responding, and they weren't speaking our language because we were boots on the ground. We were seeing this. And then when we were actually provided, we saw that they actually cared for us and they were listening to us, then especially the experienced officers, we began to know that, it was humbling that they were actually giving us things to worry about our mental well-being, which in turn went back to the community. When we went back out dealing on the overdose, the calls, we were better on the calls because
Paul,
we used to
tell them the one thing that really pisses you off that you miss.
We love the yoga classes. We love the yoga classes. We have the yoga classes 2 days a week, Monday and Friday, 7:30, and if we have to miss that class, we are very upset.
We were preparing for this the other day, and he said, and I went, yoga. And he said, Mayor, pity the poor fool that makes me miss yoga class.
We love it. We actually have counseling sessions. We talk about the week and some of the things, and a lot of it is venting, and then you go into your me time with yoga. So that's very helpful, and the officers and first responders appreciate that.
So this is amazing. So you have counseling sessions now that you've set up for the first responders. You're providing opportunities for yoga. What other kind of experiences do the officers get to have as part of this new program?
There's discounted venues, things that you can go to in the community. There's massage opportunities. I haven't experienced all of them, but there's quite a few things that they're providing.
We also have a kitchen that teaches healthy cooking. They even have a cooking class for the officers and the firefighters and their families to come in. What's also been nice is a lot of the businesses are starting to step up to do things where there's first responder night only, movie night, picnics and such. Some with the community, but just some that just lets them have their own downtime without another soul. They're placing demands on their time.
That is fantastic. It strikes me, and this struck me when we even spoke before this event, that even beyond the programs, a simple acknowledgement that you see the pain that the officers are struggling with and that you recognize that it's valuable to address that, that in and of itself seems like an important part of the healing process. I'm curious, as you've rolled out this program, and I know it's still early days, how are you thinking about measuring the progress that you're making? And has anything surprised you that you've learned so far?
Well, what surprised me at first is, as we had a survey of 35 of our officers and firefighters, and then an additional survey of 67 of them. At first, we were hearing from 39% of them that they felt that they were properly trained, right? 39% said they felt they were properly trained. That left 61% on the other side. That certainly concerned me. But then I also heard that 69% said that there was not a care by the administration as to actually how this was affecting them. They were feeling that we were showing more empathy to those who were fighting addiction than we were with them. So we knew that we were going to have to move the dial in one fashion. Found out early on, shoot, it's not that long ago, it was in 2014 when we decided to start actively, aggressively fighting the opioid epidemic, is that we had to have real-time data. We were operating with what the Centers for Disease Control was giving us, which was 2 years old. In other words, that was as though someone was throwing a pitch 2 years ago and then we're swinging 2 years later. You know we're going to miss the ball. Two years ago, we had one afternoon of 26 overdoses. That was when fentanyl came into our town. If we were going on what is coming from the Centers for Disease Control, just now, today, fentanyl would be identified as entering our neighborhoods. If we can have in our own financial system every quarter that the largest companies of the nation can provide their quarterly earnings, why in heaven's name can't we make sure that we're having up-to-date data as to what's happening in our neighborhoods?
You're here. That's such a good point, and we know that a key part of the solution to addressing the opioid epidemic is going to be getting that data right, getting it more quickly to the communities that need it. We're just at the point where we have to wrap up here, but I just want to say that one of the things that you have helped to highlight through the extraordinary work that you're doing in Huntington, West Virginia, is the fact that the emotional well-being of our people matters, of our first responders, of our nurses and doctors who are in hospitals and clinics taking care of those struggling with addiction, the emotional well-being of our community members. And it has become increasingly clear when you look at the data around emotional well-being that it is an important driver of the opioid epidemic itself. And it became very clear to me when I was serving as Surgeon General that if we are not addressing emotional well-being, that we will not be able to address the opioid epidemic in America. And you stand out as a shining example of how to do that. And you started off with the population of first responders, but I'm excited to see where you're going to go because I can already see that you've started to shift culture around how people are thinking about emotional well-being and they're more open to addressing it. So I'm just thrilled that you were with us today. I wish we had an hour more because I know there's so many more lessons that you have to share with us. But thank you for the extraordinary work that you're doing and for inspiring us.